Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner, and the Jewish world has been talking, debating about what you can do on Shabbos. Is the KosherSwitch kosher, not kosher? Last week we had a program about it. And this week we've invited to have live in our studios Menashe Kalati, the founder and the CEO of KosherSwitch Technologies. And this is an exclusive into the first interview that he has given about the subject. Also live in our studios have Torah Ruben Abramoff, and Oren Bitzali. They are part of the KosherSwitch team, and they switched to KosherSwitch. So let me welcome all of you to our broadcast, Shavua Tov. Let me begin with you, Menashe. You've been working on this for a while. I know you've been in technology. Let's look at the beginning. How did you get involved in creating the KosherSwitch?
Zev, thanks so much, first of all, for having us. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Shavua Tov, a good tavach to everyone. To answer your question, you're exactly correct. I've had a very long history in IT and technology, and I got started in the KosherSwitch path about 8 years ago, when I felt like I was zoche to create something that's very special, and took it one step at a time, just going to my local Rabbanim, hearing that there's something to talk about and that there's halachic viability, and then just going step by step, having tremendous zchut to meet some of the largest and most amazing Torah minds that we have access to, and heard over and over again that what we're doing is something special.
Now, before we get to the controversy, how does it work? How does the KosherSwitch work? Let's look at the technology. How does it avoid desecrating the Sabbath that you can turn on a switch, in your opinion?
Sure, absolutely. So the way to really understand how it works is one must see, and that's usually what we do, not usually, invariably. We're sitting with Rabbanim and we're showing them a proof of concept box, which is a clear box that really gives over.
Even though this is radio, you're showing
right.
You're holding it up in front of me right now.
Right.
Okay.
And you could see this box in many of the pictures, some of the videos that are.
And also on YouTube.
Correct. This specific box is not on YouTube, but it's when you look at the pictures of some Rabbanim that have, and are endorsing it, and in the photos, you could actually see the box. You could see the binder full of material and haskamas and truvas and so forth. So that's really the most compelling way to understand how the KosherSwitch works. But in a nutshell, a KosherSwitch is a switch that installs in wall and replaces your Shabbos clocks and traditional wall switches. And the user, what you're doing is you're just flicking a piece of plastic that's completely isolated. It's electromechanically isolated.
But when I put it on, doesn't the light go on?
The light does not go on at all, actually. And the switch has two modes. It has a weekday mode and a Shabbos mode. And in weekday mode, the light goes on instantly and guaranteed when you flick that piece of plastic. You're still flicking that isolated piece of plastic, but the light will go on instantly and guaranteed. And in Shabbos mode, it will actually not go on, guaranteed. Meaning, when you take your action, nothing's active behind the scenes in the switch.
So how does the light go on then?
So what's happening is in normal mode, you have a constant pulsing light internal to the switch. And your movement of that isolated piece of plastic is unblocking or blocking that light pulse that's occurring inside the switch. Now, in weekday mode, that pulse is constantly happening. It's happening actually every few milliseconds. So a few times a second, it's constantly pulsing. And when you remove that barrier, when you move that obstruction, when you're moving that piece of plastic that's isolated, the computer that's on board on each of these switches will see that change and will act on it, turning the room light on, keeping it on, or turning the room light off and keeping it off. However, on Shabbos mode, which one switches to obviously before Shabbos, because the button that you use to make that movement is an actual regular electric switch, and that's hiding behind a door so that you don't actuate it accidentally. But in Shabbos mode, what's happening is you see a green light or a red light on the face of the switch. And when you see that green light, it gives you insight what's happening behind the scenes. And what's happening behind the scenes in Shabbos mode is nothing. Very different than the weekday mode. So if we take a quick look at this proof of concept, you see the constant pulsing. This is the normal mode. Right. And when we switch to Shabbos mode, the constant pulsing just dies. There's nothing active there with the pulsing. So all I'm doing now, when I move that piece of plastic, that on-off switch on the KosherSwitch, is I'm moving an isolated piece of plastic that doesn't really affect anything at the time of my action, and it's not even causative. Meaning the classic examples of groma that we look at in the Talmud and in the poskim.
Remembering that you're doing one action that triggers something else, which gives you the original action that you wanted.
Right,
Okay.
an indirect causation method of doing things. The classic examples in the Talmud are, placing earthenware jugs of water that will explode when a fire approaches the jug. So there's a fire that's burning. I want to put it out. I'm not going to directly put it out because that would be asur. That would be something that would be wrong. But the Talmud suggests that you can place earthenware jugs so that when the fire approaches, they will explode and extinguish the fire. So in our case, what's very important and what's very insightful in some of the response that has been published regarding the KosherSwitch, proving and supporting why KosherSwitch is allowed and it's not groma, is we're not, in the case of the KosherSwitch, we're not really acting on the fire. We're not acting on the fire or the jugs in our case. So the fire doesn't exist, the jugs don't exist, and all I'm doing is moving a barrier at a time where it's not even a barrier. So it's not even hasarat hamonea. There's a lot of examples are brought that KosherSwitch is grama or it's hasarat hamonea, and the point is that we're moving this piece of plastic at a time where it's really not doing anything because there is nothing active with that pulsing light. So there is no jugs of water, there is no fire, and then later on they will be active. And so my action happened at a time where nothing really existed.
But the light goes on, so there is an action that takes place.
Right, correct. And that's actually a question that was posed from a very lay point of view. I posed it personally. Some others on our team have posed it to some of the great minds that have ruled on it and have ruled that it's not grama. From a very lay perspective, well, at the end of the day, it's my action that causes this to happen, seemingly. Is it not? And the answer has always been, well, no. Halachically, there is no maaseh. There is no action that's considered a maaseh at the time where you're taking it, when you're making that action. So while it's true that if I wouldn't have taken that action, nothing would happen, well, at the time that I'm taking this action, there was nothing of significance in play or active.
Now, let me ask you this question. Who do you have when you're dealing with things that deals with technology and halacha? You need to have rabbinic experts.
Sure.
So I'm sure you've consulted them. Who have you spoken to? Who have said, Menashe, this is kosher, you can use it on Shabbos without worrying about grama, without worrying about desecrating the Holy Sabbath? Who has given you the approbations?
Right. So if you look on our website, KosherSwitch.com, actually the website today routes to our Indiegogo campaign, which was highly successful. You've probably heard and seen. We were looking to raise $50,000 in over a month, and Baruch Hashem, we were able to raise that amount, our goal, in under 4 days, 3 days and change. And so there's obviously a very compelling demand, compelling need across different spectrums. Tangentially, but looking at the website, KosherSwitch.com/live now gets you there. There's a long list of haskamas, many names that are, I think, very recognizable. Many have raised issues with our methodology, our truthfulness. Did we lie? Did we misrepresent? And I just want to clear the air and say that all of that is absolute falsehoods and lashon hara, unfortunately, with no basis,
But did some rabbanim that originally endorsed you take it back when the controversy erupted? I have an email here, question, I'm going to find it right now, and this email wants to know, is it true that Rabbi Noah Holbaum has reversed his psak and now says that one should not use the KosherSwitch?
So all of what we've presented has been truthful at the time that was issued to us. Rav Holbaum Shalita is one of those examples. He states, we try very, very hard not to put words into anyone's mouths. We don't editorialize. If you look at our Haskama list, our table, we don't provide any kind of explanation or editorialization of what a Rav may or may not have said. We present the letter or the video in its entirety, unmodified, unadulterated. So in the case of Rav Holbaum Shlita's video, it's out there. People can go listen to what he said. He says essentially, maybe we could play it so that, again, we're not misstating what he said, but essentially he says that he's reviewed the technology carefully. He's looked through our contras, which is the binder with all the information, and he finds it not to be there's no malacha involved in the KosherSwitch, and it's not even grama. So he says that very clearly. And then he says, on the other hand, mitzat sheni, every person should ask their own Rav with regards to the spirit of Shabbos. So he did have that concern, and we didn't hide that from anyone, from the world, which is more indicative of our authenticity and being very forthcoming. What's very interesting.
Why are some people so upset?
That's a good question. It's a question I think to pose to the people that are upset. I keep stating over and over again that we try to do things very transparently and very with very pure intentions. The Rav gave his video. Obviously, he gave his video knowing he's being recorded, with permission to record him and use it. We weren't, chas v'shalom, coercing him in any way, holding a gun to his head. Chas v'shalom. The people have insinuated a lot of things. Believe it or not, there are many out there that are claiming that we've doctored the videos. They've photoshopped the videos, using their language. How is that even possible? So, in the case of Rav Olbaum, the video is there. If a Rav wants to restate his position, clarify his position, again, we're welcome for them doing that, obviously.
Have you heard from Rabbi Olbaum directly or his people?
So Rav Olbaum contacted us, I believe it was a day or two after we launched, and he had one concern, and one big concern, and that concern was that people are not necessarily listening to the video. They're not looking at the video, and they're not listening to exactly what he said. And so he's concerned that because, we had his picture on the Indiegogo page, among other pictures of Rabbanim there. And his concern was that since his picture is there, many people are not going to go through the process of looking at the video and are going to assume incorrectly that he meant certain things that maybe he didn't. They're not going to hear the part where he says about, the spirit of Shabbos and asking your own Rav. And that was the major concern. And we obliged immediately, and we, the only requirement that the Rav Shlita requested of us is to remove his picture from that page. And we clarified in great detail and in an unambiguous fashion that everything else can stay. He's happy with everything else, and we can use the video and so forth, and he agreed to all that. And that was the extent of the communications there. I know that there's been clarifications posted online, allegedly by his son, who I believe essentially says the same thing that we've been showing. We haven't really changed what he said. And he says that the Rav, holds that there's two aspects to Shmiras Shabbos. One is the halachic side, one is the spirit of Shabbos side, and he's clearly stated his opinion with regards to both, that halachically it's mutar in the sense that there's no malacha and there's no grama. However, there's this concern for spirit of Shabbos, and that's going to be more subjective
that, because I was in shul, and Leslie Westrach said to me, well, even if the kosher switch to be kosher, it means I can turn on a switch, I can turn on a TV, so all of a sudden I lose the spirit of Shabbos. So even if it's 100% kosher, I think it changes the dynamics. So that's just what somebody mentioned to me in shul the other day.
And that's a great point, and that's a great, wonderful question. It's a question that we've heard for the last 8 years. And the answer to it is quite simply, first of all, you can argue that about anything. You could argue that about the Shabbos clock, and it has been argued that the Shabbos clock is going to ruin Shabbos. And as a matter of fact, there are many people that do put their TVs on a Shabbos clock, and they watched a ball game on if it's an important playoff game, they put their radio on. So people are doing that with the Shabbos clock. So are we going to now rise up and say, ban the Shabbos clock because people are doing that? Obviously, we don't. Any technology or really any tool that's out there can be used for good, and it can be used for bad. You can argue that a shechita knife should be asur because you can murder someone with a shechita knife, or an eruv is bad, because people can abuse it. You could start pushing your piano up and down the street. All of those arguments are valid to an extent, but when you take a look at KosherSwitch is a tool. We're technologists. We're not telling people how to use it. We've created something that's out there, and the tool has value, and it can be abused like anything else. So certainly, if you're putting this on your TV, or some say, oh, this will end up in cars. Well, our intention obviously is for it never to go beyond places where it does provide both Oneg Shabbos and prevents Chilul Shabbos en masse, and that's part of the benefits of the KosherSwitch. While also, one of the concerns is being wasteful and not violating Baal Tashchis and so forth. So that's another small element of the kosher switch, where it's being now green, environmentally friendly, and also saving some
Save electricity so you
Correct.
don't burn as much as you ordinarily would if you kept the light on the whole time.
Exactly, because the alternative is leaving your lights on all of Shabbos and Yom Tov. Think about a three-day Shabbos
And
Yom
when
Tov.
you shut it off, is that what you have the same principle working, that you're not shutting it off directly?
Correct. I hope that answers your question, Zev.
We're gonna break in just a moment. I think whenever Ruben, did you want to say something? Haftorah, man.
I was listening to Menashe speaking, and we have to be clear what's the rule and what's the exception. What appears on the cover of the Daily News is not the rule of life. It's what happened that was an exception to the rule. So when Menashe is speaking about the usage of the kosher switch, what he's explaining to us is the rule. If something happened, that it inspired him actually, that he was sitting in the dark and he had guests, so he wanted to avoid being embarrassed and filled with shame, and he thought intellectually and coupled it along with the halacha, and he went out, not one Rav, not two Rav. I watched the 10 videos from different Rabbanim. I'm so happy that it went viral. I'm so happy that there are two sides discussing this. We're the Jewish people, we are alive, we are organic, and we are evolving. And something is not for everybody. There's certain things that are for me, there's certain things that are not for me. It doesn't make it impossible for people to have innovation within the religion.
Oren.
I would just like to add that we are quite comfortable with the protests from the perspective of Zilzul Shabbos. We feel that given the history of the Shabbos timers, the rabbinic protests at the time helped to curb the misuse of the Shabbos timers. Rav Feinstein himself was concerned that people will use it to run their factories on Shabbos. And therefore, if there is a protest, if there's a general Shomer Shabbos out there, Shomer Shabbos doesn't mean somebody who observes the Shabbos. Shomer Shabbos has to defend and protect the Shabbos. And if that's their claim, then we would like that sound to be very loud, because it will curb the misuse of the kosher switch. And on the contrary, we do welcome those sort of protests.
But will the protests make it harder for KosherSwitch to launch?
The kosher switch has launched, and it will be in people's hands, Mirza Hashem, in a few months. The last thing we want is for people to claim we're also thieves. So, we're going to try very hard to get units to people. And there's going to be different use methodologies out there. We already see from the very large support base that we've received that there's going to be different observance levels on the observance spectrum, different institutions that are picking them up in large quantities, shuls, assisted living centers, and so forth. And again, I think Ruben raised a very valid point. This is something that is not necessarily for everybody, and we welcome a very healthy and respectful debate about the halachic aspects of the switch.
Live in our studios, Menashe Kalati, founder, CEO of KosherSwitch Technologies, Inc. This is his first interview, an exclusive one, dealing with the subject. Haftorah man Ruben Abramoff is live in our studios. Or Vitaly also involved with KosherSwitch. When we come back, we're going to get to some of your comments, your thoughts. Email is a great way to get through us, zev@talklinecommunications.com. That's zev@talklinecommunications.com. Our number, 1-888-NYC Radio. That's 1-888-NYC Radio, or 888-692-7234. We'll be right back with more of KosherSwitch and Shabbos right after these messages. Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner, live in our studios. Exclusive interview with Menashe Kalati, founder, CEO of KosherSwitch Technologies. They want to make Shabbos easier and more accessible, but they've been controversial because there's a lot of discussion about it. Haftorah man Ruben Abramoff is live in our studios as well. Oren Bezaleli. Did I get it right? Okay, fine. And we're discussing KosherSwitch. Our numbers are, by the way, 1-888-NYC Radio, 1-888-NYC Radio. Email is a wonderful way to get through with your questions tonight. We have a whole bunch of email questions for you. So let's take a couple right now. Email questions. Here's what the Brooklyn person writes. I watched the video and found the video objection when a man asked a woman to come up to his bedroom, turn off the light. Just curious why he needed to use that scene. And I guess I have a couple more that are asking the same way.
Sure.
Just to tell our audience, there's a YouTube video out there where a man's saying, where he's showing that if he had the switch, he wouldn't have to need the situation where he has no lights, and he asked to have this woman come up to turn on the lights so he can have it for Shabbos.
Right. Well, first of all, we want to just clarify that a lot of people misunderstood or misinterpreted that footage. It's part of the main video, the Indiegogo video, which is critical, obviously, for explaining what it is that we're doing. There was a lot of backlash for several reasons. One of them was a misunderstanding that we're actually claiming that you're allowed to do those things. We saw a lot of that online, calls of, how dare they? They don't even understand the halacha. Nobody is allowed to do that. You're not allowed to use your baby to switch the lights off and so forth. And obviously, that's exactly the point that we were trying to make. That we all, as a community, go through these procedures, these loopholes, these little tricks that we've come up with, because there is no better way, truth be told. So we do have to use the child. We use the child, and we ask the child to hit the switch, do it for mommy, do it for Abba, or we do ask the goy to come and do things that it's clearly in violation of halacha. By the way, most people think that you're allowed to hint to a goy if it's only with a hint. To a non-Jew. Many think that it's allowed to be done if it's letzorech tzibur, if you're doing it for the masses. There is a lot of objection to that by the poskim and the halachic material. But all of that having been said, we do understand and acknowledge that it's a very sensitive topic.
Very sensitive. I think they weren't objecting to the concept; they're objecting to this scenario where there's a hint,
right?
Where he's inviting. He wants to turn on the light, but there's a hint there that might be something else. Innuendo, right? That's
so
what people
it was done with
humor, sure.
And many saw it with that humor and found it very humorous and apropos. We understand that many did not, and many were offended, and we certainly apologize to anyone that got offended. If we had,
it was not your intent to offend anybody.
Absolutely not the intent to offend anybody. If we had a time machine to go back and redo things, we would have tweaked certain things. Instead of the bedroom, it would have been something else. Maybe less suggestive, and so forth. We did have also objections, by the way, of much further to an extreme of how dare you have a woman on the video? How dare you have a blonde shaitel on the video? How dare you have this ring that she has on her finger if she flicks the switch on the video? So we understand there's a lot of different sensitivities out there within different communities, and we do apologize. Incidentally, once we did, establish the video, we did some testing, and it did very well. Testing with some very, I would say, very frum and orthodox individuals. A few rabbanim found it, not to be so objectionable. But in any case, we do apologize, and it was not our intent to offend anybody.
Here's another email question. Why is there a need for hospitals or homes? Aren't there nurses who do all the muksa stuff? I guess for the hospital, that'll be a question. Why do you need to have it there?
I've spent many months in a hospital with my daughter, and I could safely say there were dozens and dozens of extremely apparently religious people that were abusing their nurses and asking them to do all sorts of things for them. And in many cases, they were requesting them to do Isurei D'Oraita, prohibitions that they were forbidden to ask the Gentile to do. They were clearly clueless about the parameters of Amir al-Hukum. They were asked them to make them coffees, not for the sick, just for themselves. There was a lot of abuse, and the nurses were complaining. They were complaining at the fact that they became slaves all of a sudden on Shabbos for these religious people.
Zev at talklinecommunications.com is our email. Zev at talklinecommunications.com if you want to get through. Here's another email question. Andy writes, but doesn't the movement of the plastic still cause a completion of circuit just with a time delay causing a current?
So actually, no. The movement of the plastic does not cause any completion of any circuit. And if we want to look at it by way of analogy, a great way of looking at it is the following. Suppose we have a robot outside of our room. outside of our dining room is a robot, and we programmed this robot to approach the light switch once a minute and flick that switch for us. If it's on, it'll be off. If it's off, it'll be on. He just very blindly and dumbly approaches, flicks the switch, and goes back and is dormant for another minute. And he does this every minute on the minute for the entire course of the Shabbos or Yom Tov. So what we're doing with the KosherSwitch, really all you're doing, you're not interacting with the robot and you're not interacting with the light switch at all. All you're doing is opening or closing the door in between that robot and the light switch. So in between those cycles, I'm opening the door that's blocking or preventing that robot from approaching. If the door is closed, the robot's going to approach, bump into the door, and go back to sleep for another minute. But if I open the door, then I'm allowing that robot to approach the switch, and I'm doing it at a time where the robot's not active and that light switch is not active. That's sort of the analogy for the KosherSwitch.
But how does the light get on then?
So again, we're unblocking the pathway for something to happen in the future. But at the time of our action, there is nothing that's active with that potential.
But is it always guaranteed the light will go on?
So there are two elements. One is this indirectness of me doing something on an isolated piece of plastic so that I haven't really caused anything because it's not even preventative at the time of my action. And the other element is this concept of psik resha and is something guaranteed to happen. So we haven't even spoken about the other element, which is there is no 100% guarantee within each cycle in the Shabbos mode that something will occur.
So you can turn it on and it won't go on. That's
so
a
you
possibility.
It's like spinning a dreidel. You know, how many times do I have to spin a dreidel before I get a gimel? If you ask my daughter, my oldest daughter, she'll tell you it's much more than 1 in 4 because she usually loses when she's playing her sisters. But the answer is it's not 1 in 4. So even if the chances of a gimel is 1 in 4 statistically, you could spin a dreidel 20 times and not get a gimel.
So there'll be times I can turn on the switch and it won't go on.
Well, you could flick the switch and it can trigger either on the first cycle. The switch is constantly going through its cycles. The cycles are also random in duration. As opposed to weekday where it's constantly happening, the switch is usually not doing anything in Shabbos mode. And at the very end of each cycle of random length, it's going to shoot out that one pulse, maybe. And the maybe is that suffix, that doubt, that halachic doubt of whether or not it can shoot out that pulse to figure out where the plastic is. And then there's another suffix that it has to overcome, whether or not it can act on what it found in that first phase or the first suffix. So the net result is within each cycle, there is no guarantee for it to happen. Cycles keep repeating themselves. Statistically, you expect it to happen within a certain number of cycles. The success rates are also random, by the way, so there's no easy way to predict how many cycles it'll take. But at the end of the day, we do expect it to trigger, statistically speaking. But theoretically speaking, it can run all of Shabbos and not trigger.
Here's another email question, and they're coming in fast and furious. This is what Stewart writes. I appreciate your creativity, but isn't the device a way of turning on lights? That means originally when all the no technical malacha is done, but your intent and goal is accomplished. Where do we find this in halacha?
Well, the human effort to turn on or off the light is completely isolated, and the external force which you are harnessing is not active at the time that you do the human effort of moving the switch there. And therefore your intentions are not particularly that important in the sense that intentions on Shabbat, Melechet Machshavet, have to be combined with some human effort. And therefore we see examples that are brought in the responsa that defend the KosherSwitch. For example, the Rav Chaim Tzvi Shapira, who quotes the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Takid, in the end of Saif Gimel, the description of a person who would put a candle towards his door, check that there's no wind, and then open the door. His intention is to extinguish the candle, and there's an expectation that the candle will be extinguished within a few minutes, but currently there's no gust of wind, and therefore his human effort is not combined with any external force, and the Shulchan Aruch seems to decide that that's permissible. So this is a similar example to that. The only difference is we're not moving anything closer to anything, and we're not encouraging the gorem or the nigram. We are simply moving an isolated piece of plastic at a time when there is no natural external force. And therefore, the intention becomes very much secondary in the halachic analysis.
We're looking at the controversial KosherSwitch, and it's going to be out there, as you heard, in just a short while. Our guest live in the studio, Menashe Kalati, founder, CEO of the KosherSwitch technology. And also live in our studio have Torah man Ruben Abramoff and Oren Bezaleli, and part of the KosherSwitch team. When we come back, more of your emails, zev@talklinecommunications.com. That's zev@talklinecommunications.com. Our number, 1-888-NYC Radio. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. I can't believe how fast time flies. Maybe there's a switch we can turn back the clock. Our guest live in our studio, Menashe Kalati, founder, CEO of the controversial KosherSwitch. And have Torah man Ruben Abramoff is live in our studio, as is Oren Bezaleli.
It's getting worse.
I'm getting worse, right.
You
Okay.
started off very close.
Okay, so we're going to get to by the time the show is over. We'll switch to the right pronunciation. And we're looking, of course, at the KosherSwitch. We only have a little while left. We're taking some of your emails, zev@talklinecommunications.com. That's zev@talklinecommunications.com. Here's another email question from Joseph. Why would the average person need a KosherSwitch as opposed to the timers we have now?
That's actually a great question, so thank you for that question. Timers that we have now are, they're a great tool. We all use them. They're very ubiquitous, but they're also very limited when you compare it to the newer and techno innovations out there, not just the KosherSwitch, but other innovations as well. One good example is the kosher lamp. Kosher lamp gives you, quote-unquote, on-demand control of electricity or lighting on Shabbat in a very different way that we are. And yet, it's very necessary and viable compared to a Shabbos clock. So if you look at your typical Shabbos clock, we run into a lot of issues as a community. All of us use them, and we run into a lot of issues regarding the Shabbos clocks. One main issue is that it requires predictability and forecasting of where you're going to be and when you're going to be in a certain location. And of course, we know that we're not prophets, and it's very difficult to predict those needs before Shabbos. And sometimes on a 3-day Yom Tov plus Shabbos, it becomes impossible. Things change. I'll give you one quick example, actually, an anecdote that I know of personally. The house is set up for not being home Friday night, Erev Shabbos. Family's going out to the in-laws, and that's the plan. So all the home is set for not so active lighting and so forth for Friday night. And lo and behold, the husband comes home, and the baby has a fever, and they're not going anywhere. So what happens in that condition? What happens in that state? Now you're sitting in the dark. Your Oneg Shabbos is out the window because you didn't expect to be in that room at that time, in that instance. KosherSwitch solves that problem in a way that a timer can never do that. The alternatives would be, again, to go and either do the B'shinoi, use the baby, find a Shabbos goy, all that are inferior to, again, assuming that the KosherSwitch, based on the opinions that say the KosherSwitch is allowed, would be inferior to the KosherSwitch.
Go ahead, Oren. You wanted to chime in.
I do want to point out that the scene that we had in the video with the notorious innuendo scene that has given us so much trouble, it was merely there to express a situation which is awkward. Obviously, if you're going to switch off a light, it's going to be the bedroom light, where you're not going to ask a Gentile to come from the street and switch off your basement light. It's going to be the bedroom light. And it's just to express the awkwardness of the situation of Amir al-Akum, of the occasions when you need to ask a Gentile to help you out. And there's another point that I would like to make for the use of the KosherSwitch, is that we come from a community in Great Neck, the Persian Mashadi community. And we are a community that have stuck together despite the fact that we have more, I would say, committed members to the tradition and less committed members to the tradition. There's not a single family that doesn't have observant Shmirat Shabbat and less Shmirat Shabbat. And this is a device which will unite families, will allow there to be comfortability within families. And this is part of the messianic image that we have from Sefer Malachi, Ve'yeshiv levavot al banim ve'lev banim al avotam, the united families that have been separated for all of these years by difference in religious observance. So here, we've had many orders during these early days from parents who said that their children are not comfortable staying in their house for Shabbat, and this is going to change things for them, and this is really going to win them back into their families. And this is part of the focus that we have in our community. It might not be shared by all communities, but in our community, it's certainly a big focus for the KosherSwitch.
Bali, do you see those that may not be comfortable using the KosherSwitch on Shabbos, that they would use it for Yontif or second day Yontif?
Absolutely. And there's actually a page on our website that says, it asks the question, who is the KosherSwitch for? And if you look there, you'll see, first of all, we make a very clear statement there that, what is the nature of our role here to begin with? We're not poskim, we're not rabbis, we're not, dictating to people how to use it, where to use it. We're just, we've been fortunate, we've been zoche to create a technology which we feel is going to bring good to the world. Most Rabbanim that we've met with over the last 8 years reaffirm that. And we've created this technology, and we're letting people decide how they're comfortable using it. Certainly, where you're coming from, what community you're a part of. We have families that, we actually have testimonials that have emailed us telling us, thank you for saving my marriage. My wife is not yet Shomer Shabbos. I am. This will bring tremendous peace in our home. There are those that are even farther to the left that, within the conservative movement that would find the KosherSwitch appealing because there are many within the conservative movement that have certain notions of Shmirat Shabbos, not necessarily, obviously not the way that on the Orthodox side we do, but still, certain notions, and they would find it of value. And like we said, also within public settings, shuls, institutions, assisted livings, it's, within an assisted living center or framework, healthcare frameworks, hotel frameworks, this is an amenity that brings tremendous value to that institution. And if they can offer this amenity to their market, just like they offer perhaps Shabbos elevators, kosher food, some Las Vegas hotels even offer low floors for conventions when there's jewelry shows and other Jewish-oriented conventions. This is certainly an amenity that they would be able to offer as a value-adding tool or an amenity that speaks to their market and caters to their market.
Do you have to have an electrician put in the switch? How does that work? I was curious. I'm looking at the device right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually a very simple installation, just like you would install a Shabbos clock or a switch. Whatever you do now, if it's a handyman, if it's you, if it's an electrician, that's what normally you would do. Obviously, we recommend, as a company, that you use a licensed and insured electrician for regulation reasons. But again, it's a very simple installation. You could see Zev here. It's few wires, and it just, you pull out what's there and you stick this into the wall using something called wire nuts. You just screw it together with the existing wires, and you're off and you're done. The current version, by the way, of the switch that we've launched through Indiegogo, it requires a neutral wire, an AC neutral wire, which not all wall boxes have, and so that's just a clarification we wanted to make sure everyone understands.
Okay, we have we're going to be right back. Okay, we're going to stay over here. I have a lot of questions coming. Okay, so here's a question coming in. Here's a little bit more of a humorous vein, the question that I think people have a good sense of humor. If somebody forgot to switch the KosherSwitch to Shabbos mode, is he allowed to tell a non-Jew to do it?
That's a great question. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that they raise this question because it actually comes back to a very, very critical point in the motivation for the KosherSwitch. So obviously, we understand the motivation of sitting in the dark with your guests. I think that point was driven home very clearly. That's an experience I personally had in the middle of Shabbos dinner, and lights go off, and it's something that's happened to all of us. It's extremely awkward. And what do you do? But aside from that, there's also the motivation of Shmiras Shabbos and preventing Chilul Shabbos. And one of the very compelling elements of the KosherSwitch is even in its normal mode, the weekday mode, not in Shabbos mode, even in its normal mode, it still avoids many of the Isurim and the prohibitions that involve or relate to use of electricity in general. So if you look at the classic objections for use of electricity of bonen, soter, molid, nitzotzot, sparks, all these things go away, Zev, when you look at the kosher switch, even in the normal mode. So we've asked poskim, and again, we're not ruling on this, but if one asks a Rav, can a goy use this? Can you actually tell a goy to flick the switch when it's not in Shabbos mode? The answer I think you will hear is yes, because it's shvut to shvut. It's not necessarily, that's not a doraita. You're flicking that switch. It's not really doing anything. That's in the normal mode. It's perhaps a grama, and so forth. So I think, the humorous side, I think there is a real question there, and I believe that's the answer.
Almost out of time. Somebody actually emailed me. How much does it cost?
So the switch will probably retail for $60. We were looking at $55 to $60. Most likely, it's going to be $59.95 is the way we're looking at as a suggested retail. Right now, through the Indiegogo campaign, people are picking it up for a dime, so to speak. We have it up to 45% off that retail price. So we had some early birds that got snapped up and snatched on the first day. I think all of them were gone for $100 for a 3-pack, which means that the switch is probably very close to our cost. We just wanted to bring incentive, and right now through May 19th, where the campaign is running, that crowdfunding campaign is running, is where all these very large incentives are out there, and people can pick them up for much cheaper than normally would.
Getting a whole bunch of emails. I'll just consolidate. Many of the Rabbanim who your guest claims have endorsed the kosher switch have in fact only issued a blessing or permitted for cholim, that's sick people, and extreme situations only. Rabbis Newworth, Olbaum, Hafarnas, and Starmer have clearly said they're not permitted to be used for the public at large. Your response?
Right. This is a very common, I think,
I'm getting a lot of emails like that.
Sure, sure. A lot of misinformation out there. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of negative write-ups about kosher switch in some of the mainstream Jewish media. Personally, I'm actually very disappointed. I didn't understand until a week ago that we have a lot of tabloid papers out there. I thought as a Jewish nation we're better than that. When you have a headline that states, and I think most of us saw this headline. It's not necessary to state where it appeared, who the author was. I think most of us have seen this. The kosher switch, where Rabbanim misled. And the entire article doesn't deal with that misleading headline. I think that speaks volumes. The only fine point that was brought in that entire article was the topic of Dayan Harfines Shalita, who I think people would be at a loss to explain how exactly we misled or misrepresented his position. Dayan Harfines, we've been in consultations with for years. We value very much his opinion, his feedback, all of his critique and advice that he gave us through the years. He ended up ruling in his letter, if one reads it carefully, that kosher switch is not grama. He writes his words are adifi migrama. If we could pull up his letter, we can actually read it inside. But he says it's better than grama that is usually permitted in cases of loss or choleh. But he chose to limit his letter, his haskama, for choleh, for the sick, for rehabs, for hospitals. And we respect that. And we published his letter, Zev, on the website. It only appears on an endorsement table on our website. And it clearly states what he stated. Now, others, with perhaps some alternative concerns or motivations. By the way, the two most critical bodies of KosherSwitch, one in Eretz Yisrael and one here, are actually direct competitors, and they're in conflict. They're nagua badavar, and they're running around creating this tumult. We believe that some of them went to Dayan Harfines, explained, I'm not sure what to him, that we were somehow misrepresented him. He doesn't appear anywhere in the video. He doesn't appear anywhere on the packaging. He doesn't appear anywhere except for the website, and we've clearly placed him with a full letter of, it's allowed for a choleh, and we respect that because it's also viable for a choleh for hospitals and institutions.
Almost out of time. A little moment left. Any closing thoughts?
It's been a very exciting journey, last many years. Getting here, very humbling, sitting in front of many Talmidei Chachamim, huge poskim. We've always presented the information fully. We've always presented a binder that has very clear endorsements that are lechatchila. All the insinuations and accusations that we misled and we misinformed. Big names like Rav Neurith, Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata Zatzal, are baseless and unfounded. We walked away from these great Torah minds with great encouragement. Every time I've sat personally with any of them, the question that I always finish the meeting with is very simply, from a very simple and tam perspective, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu proud of me? That's always what I've asked. And I was always told, yes, this is good. Go ahead, do this. Those that gave haskamas for chole were clear about that. Those that didn't, they're very specific, lechatchila haskamas, and what's being spread out there are lies. I hope everyone can take a look and judge for themselves.
Where do they go? How can they get more information?
They go to KosherSwitch.com, gets them to that Indiegogo page where we're crowdfunding, and on there there's the link to the full website, which is KosherSwitch.com/live. You could read there exactly what we've published, what the Rav wrote, the videos that they spoke, word for word, and you can judge for yourselves.
Okay, we're out of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zev.
Kaladi, the founder, CEO of KosherSwitch. Thank you, Torah man, Ruben Abramov. Even though I know you specialize in Torah, and thank you for being here. Nice to see you live in the studio. Nice to meet you. Oren Bitzaleli.
Perfect.
Okay, I told you I'd get it by the end of the show. But I told you I switch on to the right one. Gentlemen, we appreciate taking time out. We'll be back. Don't forget Wednesday and Thursday nights, WSNR 620, starting off with the Chief Rabbi Bukharian community at 7 o'clock, Rabbi Yitzchak Yehoshua. Thank you, Jake. Have a Shavua Tov. This is the Talkline Communications Network. Go to our website 24 hours a day, talklinecommunications.com. Shavua Tov.